is going to have the intake has to be shut down for more than a day or two. The feasibility of bringing in drinking water for an area such as Lakeside Park Association would be very challenging.
Thank you. I think I get the gist of it.
Okay.
Your objection is to the discharge period, not necessarily.
Period, yeah. And we feel that a 5-year moratorium would give us a chance to work out the process.
Thank you. Just for staff, you might want to look at your response for 65.2. In the first paragraph, I believe there's a typo or a mistake. Third line, actually, where am I? Not the third line. Third line from the bottom of the first paragraph. At the time that the project proponent submits its request for a prohibition, I think that should be a request for an exemption to the prohibition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joel Butner.
Thank you, Chair and members of the board. My name is Joel Bittner. I'm the General Manager of Placer Mosquito and Vector Control District, and I am representing the district today. Our agency conducts vector control operations and surveillance in the northwest quadrant of the lake. And I do want to extend our thanks to Mr. Sussman and Ms. Fiore-Wagner and the other Lahontan Board staff in working with us to really ensure that our ability to protect public health and provide vector control services in the Tahoe area remain above board in compliance with all of our regulations. As the board knows, we practice integrated vector management, where, especially in the area that we're talking about here, it's of our utmost priority to explore every other option other than use of pesticides, and we'll be continuing that in the area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That's it for our speaker cards. Ms. Dunbar, I appreciate your comments, and I think any reasonable community would covet the quality of water you have in Lake Tahoe, and I appreciate your concerns about it. When I look at this, I think the regional board has gone overboard as far as trying to make sure that there's enough oversight in permitting. A lot of what we're dealing with here today is correcting a very untenable situation where things were happening that were clearly in violation of the law because of the lack of this basin plan amendment. So I am not indifferent to your request. I'm not sure in my own mind what additional benefits there would be to a 5-year moratorium, and if we had a 5-year moratorium, we would just continue with this, what I would call untenable situation. So not that I'm indifferent to you certainly at all, but I will move that we approve this basin plan amendment.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Patty, welcome aboard. Nice seeing you again. You realize you've already got kind of the curly hair. You have to grow a beard now, so we kind of, think we've got, that's going to be tough, though, isn't it? Anyhow, welcome aboard. Mr. Howard, we have an informational item number 5. Would you please introduce that, please?
Yes, the informational item is a presentation by the Natural Resources Defense Council on volumetric wastewater pricing for the purpose of water conservation. Mr. Edward Osan will be presenting.
Mr. Chairman, can I just mention very briefly that we did receive 2 late comments on this item, and as an information item, we will be posting them to the website and indicate that they were late.
Thank you.
Could you tell us what they are and what the gist of the comments are?
It's going to be a surprise. It's 2 comment letters, essentially the same, one from the Sierra Club and the other from the League of Women Voters, both in support of the concept.
Okay. We did receive the one from US EPA.
Morning, Ed.
Am I live now?
You are.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate you fitting us into the board's schedule for this information item.
And I have to tell you, we would have fit it in even if we had a really busy schedule, but when I looked at the agenda, I was looking for filler, and so don't be too flattered about being on today's agenda, okay? No offense, I'm
Thank
just
you.
telling you, we didn't have,
No offense
we're
taken.
glad you're here.
No offense taken, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce the team that is with me today and has helped put this presentation together and has really been working with us closely over the last year and a half as we've explored this issue and tried to develop a coherent policy approach to it. To my immediate left is Dr. Tom Chestnut, who's a principal with A&N Technical Services. Tom is well known throughout the California utility industry and the water industry nationwide. He's widely published. He's done a great number of field investigations and rate analyses, and I would just note that most recently his work on specifically on price elasticity is referenced favorably in an article in the February 2012 AWWA journal written by a former assistant administrator of EPA. To Tom's left is John Farnkoff, who's a principal with HR&H Consultants. Excuse me. John also has decades of experience with California water utilities, specifically on rates for water and wastewater utility service. I would just note I'm holding the Water Environment Federation's Manual of Practice number 27, which is financing and charges for wastewater systems. John is a co-author of this WEF technical manual, so in a really almost literal sense, John helped write the book on wastewater system charges. Not here today is an attorney that I've worked closely with in preparing this issue for presentation. Michelle Mehta is an attorney in our Southern California office with considerable experience on water quality issues as well as water use efficiency. Michelle is close to her due date, and she's beyond the point when her doctor will let her get on a plane. So the issue that we're here to talk about today is volumetric wastewater pricing. It's really a simple concept that is already quite widely employed. It's for billing for sanitary sewer service, at least in part by the volume of water delivered to the premises. Currently, about 70% of California households that receive sanitary sewer service pay a flat non-volumetric rate. This is much, much higher than the number of households that still pay non-volumetric water rates. I think at this point, well over 90% of California households that are on public water supply systems are metered and pay for their water service with a volumetric rate. Notable exception being service areas within about a 15-mile radius of this building. I mentioned this is a practice that is widely employed. Both in California and around the country. Actually, this map is simply illustrative of the scope and would be filled in much more densely if individuals, entities were identified. The same with California. From Northern California to Southern California, there are many sanitary sewer service providers that are providing service to residential customers today, billing by volume. Here in California, the practice...
Could you go back to the
Sure.
previous slide?
Sure. Again, it's just illustrative, but...
I'm not familiar with all of them, but I know, for example, in Santa Rosa, aren't the wastewater and the water supply entity the same entity?
They may well be.
Do we know whether or not that reflects the rest of the
But
other?
the sanitary sewer service is provided at a volumetric rate in each of these communities that are identified.
But do you know whether in each of these instances the sanitary services provider and the water supply provider have some kind of institutional connection?
They may well have an institutional connection, or they may have an agreement of some kind. It's not uncommon for large commercial, the usage of large commercial customers to be used for billing purposes, even when residential customers continue to be billed at a flat rate.
But you don't know for sure with respect to these areas?
In the case of the Long Beach Water Department, for instance, a different municipal department provides sanitary sewer service.
But they have some kind of agreement in place?
Yeah. The policy has favored wastewater volumetric pricing for quite some time here in California. The California Urban Water Conservation Council's Memorandum of Understanding, which goes back to the early 1990s, directs that all signatory water suppliers who also provide sanitary sewer service to use conservation pricing, specifically barring flat non-volumetric rates. And it also calls upon water suppliers who do not provide sewer service to make a good faith effort to work with local sewer service providers to adopt conservation pricing. And under the terms of the MOU, good faith effort is actually defined as a series of affirmative obligations to help effectuate the policy. While the policy direction is fairly clear, we would note that wastewater agencies themselves are typically not signatories to the urban MOU. So this is why we're looking for some additional policy development. In 2010, NRDC commissioned a study by Tom's firm, A&N Technical Services, to estimate the benefits of wastewater volumetric pricing statewide. Here are some of the key benefits that were found. We're looking at potential savings of almost 150,000 acre-feet in the near term, 1 to 4 year period following adoption of the policy, and an additional virtual doubling of that total over a longer term of 10 to 20 years. We believe that the state board has both the responsibility and the authority to implement programs that result in water use efficiency. In the 20 by 2020 plan, the board is tasked with identifying new legislation and regulations and defining regional strategies for meeting regional targets. Of particular note that half of the savings are predicted to occur in the first 1 to 4 years of adoption. I think we'll come back to that concept in a little bit. In addition to saving water, wastewater volumetric pricing can also benefit the sewer agencies themselves in a number of ways. It helps to preserve collection and treatment capacity, delays or eliminates the need for costly treatment plant expansion, again, capacity-constrained areas, can reduce operational costs associated with energy, and it can reduce sewer collection system overflows in capacity-constrained systems. We have heard concerns raised about potential disbenefits of water conservation and water efficiency for wastewater utilities. And perhaps there may be some site-specific issues to be examined. Steep reductions in sewer collection flows may present challenges to the maintenance of existing infrastructure. But if there are questions about the functionality of collection systems as base flows are reduced, that's a topic that probably ought to be explored, and with possible eye towards mitigation strategies that might be developed. But the state policy to advance water efficiency has already been set. The You are undertaking a number of measures that, and we're not here to tell the board how important water conservation is. You're already charged with that and well on your way in a number of proceedings that reflect that fact. But the policy having been set, this practice of pricing wastewater service for residential customers by volume is simply one approach to achieve savings in a relatively low-cost way to help ensure that the state will indeed achieve the target that has been set by statute. Overall, the 20 by 2020 savings will be met through a combination of both indoor and outdoor water use measures. The full 20% reduction is not going to be reflected in the sanitary sewer collections. And this is just one measure out of many. So we think it's there's a potentially legitimate area of inquiry here regarding the functioning of sewer collection systems particularly, but it's not specific to the issue of wastewater volumetric pricing.
Ed, do you have an idea what the capital cost for metering would be and the O&M that would go along with that?
If you're looking at the incremental costs that would be associated with this policy, there would be none, because this policy is implemented where meters are already in place.
You're using the water meter, you're not doing a separate metering for the sewer system,
correct.
Right?
No separate metering for wastewater flows at the residential level. It's not practical.
But I would think that if we had a policy like this that was adopted, there would be a number of communities that would be required to put in metering that don't have it now. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just asking what the...
We have state law that already sets a schedule for completing the metering of public water systems. We don't envision this proposal or this policy getting out in front of the schedule that's already been provided by law for the completion of metering for public water systems.
Thank you for that answer.
Regarding the timing, our goal is to achieve an orderly conversion from flat rate to volumetric pricing within a specified time frame. And here's how we would see this playing out. As already noted, there's a 2020, the end of 2020 is the compliance year for achieving the 20% reduction in water demand. Recall that the near-term effects predicted in Tom's report are in a 1 to 4 year period. Our concept here is that if wastewater volumetric pricing were in place on January 1, 2017, it would allow a full 4 years of it being in place to capture that near-term effect in time to have an effect on the 2020 compliance year that's referenced in our current statute. And to get to an adoption statewide by 2017, under this scenario, we would envision the board taking some action in early 2013. That would allow, in that 4 year window, that would allow for collaboration that needs to take place particularly between sanitary sewer service providers and water suppliers who are not part of the same corporate or municipal or county structure and perhaps don't have a track record of collaboration and exchanging information. And it would also allow for customer outreach, which is a very important part of this. And it's highly appropriate to have a year of parallel billing where you continue to be billed, where consumers continue to be billed under the existing structure, and you get sample bills showing where you would be under the new structure and have those run in parallel for a year before the new structure goes into place. And we also envision that there are going to be some challenging cases. Some of these conversions are going to be more complicated than others, and we think it's highly appropriate to allow additional time for cause and still allow for the bulk of the near-term effects to be captured by 2020. At this point, I'd like to let Tom talk a little bit about the report that he's prepared and I think has been made available to each of the board members.
Thank you, Ed. I was asked to put together a quantitative estimate of what the effect would be of shifting towards volumetric pricing in the state of California for residential customers. And I broke this down into 3 steps. I think the white paper, I tried to make it as transparent as possible in terms of the calculations, and I'd be happy to answer any additional questions. Let's see. This way. Got it. The calculation itself uses state board data to determine the number of potentially affected sewer agencies. From that, we translated how much revenue would be at stake that's currently being generated by flat charges to residential customers. And we answered the question, if that revenue, instead of being generated by a flat charge, were recovered through a volumetric price on potable water, what would that look like? We then estimate on the 3rd step how much volumetric water conservation would occur as a result of that price increase using empirical estimates from the economic literature. I'll get going here. So the summary of the calculations, there was about $2 billion we were able to identify from the state board data of agencies that are currently recovering revenue from residential customers only using a fixed charge. Then using the state Department of Water Resources data, we estimated what their potable water use would be and translated what the effect of an increase in the potable water price would be. Then using, in that 3rd step, empirical estimates that quantify the law of demand. Specifically, when things get more expensive, we use less of it. We come up with an estimate of the water savings you would expect to see from a pure effective price in the very near term, and then also in the long run. So the estimate of water savings in the long run is greater because over a longer period of time, customers have more ways to figure out how to reduce their water consumption. They can swap out equipment when it breaks, get new plumbing fixtures and the like. It's having trouble picking up. There. So we estimate about a 3% reduction in the very near term over a 1 to 4 year period after implementation, and ultimately a 6.4% reduction in potable water consumption among affected agencies. we went ahead and translated this effect by the hydrologic region as defined by the Department of Water Resources to make this a little easier to grasp in concrete terms across the state, what this might look like and how it might contribute towards the SBX7 2020 target mandated reductions. And it does vary by area depending on the density and the breakdown of indoor and outdoor water use. So overall, we're finding a material contribution towards attaining these GPCD water demand reduction targets. I wanted to point out that this is an estimate with very specific assumptions behind it. And depending on how this is implemented and the rapidity with which it is implemented, the water savings can differ. If we were to fine-tune the estimate for the remaining unmetered water service areas that are becoming metered, you could reduce this somewhat. Also, depending on how the volumetric pricing is implemented, that can have an effect on how customers understand it happens. Factors that would increase the possible water savings include accounting for population growth. We considered that and felt it was easier to explain without addressing that. Higher future sewer bills are also likely to increase customer response. So we have also not included in this estimate of conservation potential savings from conversion of any commercial accounts that are not currently recovered on a volumetric basis. There is also an assumption that the agencies converting to volumetric pricing will continue to recover 30% of their revenue through a fixed charge. We did not assume that all of that goes away. And so you can change the potential estimate if you assign a higher fixed share of revenue from fixed charges, and alternatively you can by assigning a lower share increase the conservation potential. So that is an explanation. I'd be happy to answer questions on any of the particulars.
During the course of working on this issue, NRDC interviewed a half a dozen sanitary sewer service providers that have actually made this conversion over the last recent number of years, I think up to 8 or 9 years. We need to find somebody that could talk to us a little bit about the before and after. Many of the communities that are already measuring by volume have been doing it so long there's nobody around that can tell you about the before. In San Luis Obispo, they made this switch, I believe, in 2007. They coordinated it with a switch to monthly billing. They had been billing bi-monthly at the time. It was also done at a time when the system was contemplating major capital investments, and they expected sanitary sewer rates to go up considerably. And they found that in the public response that there was concern about equity. As the bill gets larger, then there are potentially more questions about, are the bills fair? If they're really small, it's like, who cares? If they're big, people start raising questions about it. So they retained a consultant to develop a rate structure with a small fixed component and a volumetric component. The single-family residential wastewater bill here is based on 100% of the winter water usage. Again, billing from water consumption from the water meter that's recorded during the winter months as a surrogate for the water that is going down the sanitary collection system when irrigation is, outdoor use is expected to be at its lowest. They went through the Prop 218 process. There were some simple software changes that resulted. Communicating these changes to the public was very important to the city. They have a quarterly newsletter, community-wide survey, community meetings, public hearings, and so on. Once people understood that they were going to be in more control of their bill, most people were in fact positive about the change, and there were a few written protests. Following adoption, there's been a significant reduction in winter water use, a drop of 50 gallons per day per household, or 18.5 GPCD. Now, keep in mind that this was a community that even before they adopted this strategy, they estimated that they had a 90% penetration of 1.6 gallon toilets in the service area. So many conservation measures had already been employed, and they were able to achieve additional savings here. This is the near-term effect that I think Dr. Chestnut's identified for us. At this point, I'd like to let John say a few words. We anticipate that there will be, there are in fact logistical issues and concerns in making this conversion. We've tried to anticipate most of them in a Q&A sheet that we've worked with John to assemble, and John can elaborate on just a few of the issues relating to the logistics of conversion.
Thank you, Ed.
Actually, before you do, in the example that you provided, so between 2007 and 2010, there were no other conservation measures implemented in San Luis Obispo besides the change to volumetric pricing?
No, I would not say that. I think that the city has a pretty active conservation program, and I have no doubt that they continued those. For one thing, they had a clothes washer incentive program, and they found that their participation rate doubled in their clothes washer program when they let people know that their water use was going to affect their sewer bill. So I think there was a synergistic effect.
Okay. We have already spoken a little bit about the logistics, just in terms of the use of the existing water meters. We can take advantage of all of that infrastructure that's out there. There would be no additional requirement to install water meters, and generally sewer meters are very rarely used for metering effluent, and we wouldn't expect more meters there. The agencies would continue to maintain their local discretion in designing the rates and developing the rate structures that are in compliance with the law. And these would generally be analogous to water rates with a fixed and volumetric component. And the agencies would also continue to use could continue to use their existing billing processes and the frequency of billing, and those that bill on the tax rolls could continue to do that. In billing based on flow, that has occurred for some time already. You saw the map earlier, and generally non-residential customers quite often are already being billed based on flow. Commercial, institutional, industrial customers are quite often billed on the basis of their flow. What we're really talking about here is expanding this to the single-family and multifamily residential customers, and their flows would be based on winter water use when irrigation is as low as possible. That's as close a proxy as we can get to what their wastewater flows is. It would just be completely impractical and unnecessary to install any additional metering to try to determine those winter flows. in winter flows, as you saw in San Luis Obispo, what they were using there. Sometimes there is an attempt to factor out irrigation, but that isn't necessary. Generally, you want to get a short snippet of time when you think the least amount of irrigation occurs. The billing process.
Can I stop you just a second?
Yes.
Is there a way to game the system? I mean, if you artificially control that billing, you know when it's going to be. Can you?
Yes.
Game the system?
People can either deliberately or accidentally game the system. I know that, for example, city Ukiah uses a 1-month winter period. They've been using that for some time, and some people take their vacations then. some people will send their laundry out. They'll just do whatever they can to reduce their water use. If you can use a longer period, more than 1 month, that helps to average the flow out. I like to see a period that includes the months of December through March, a 4-month billing period. People can still go on vacation. They can also have relatives come to stay for the holidays. The billing process, what you see out there, the practice with agencies that are already providing water services, that they would simply add the sewer charge to the existing bill along with the water charge. It may include other charges also. It could include a power or solid waste charge, and you're just taking advantage of what is currently either a monthly or a bi-monthly billing process. For those agencies that don't already bill like that, either because they provide water service or other utility services, what you see there is they will acquire the water data from the local water supplier, and in some cases it may be multiple water suppliers. If they've already been doing that because they're billing their non-residential customers based on flow, they just have to ask for the additional data for the residential customers. And then they determine each of the customers' bills, and they could either, they may be, it's quite common for them to already be billing on the tax rolls, or they can make arrangements to add the sewer charge to the water supplier's bill. That's done by East Bay Municipal Utility District. The effect on residential sewer bills from converting to flat to flow-based rates is that because flow has entered the picture here, customers with low flow will benefit. They generally will see a reduction in their bills, or they won't be paying as much. Typically, the median customers will see a reduction in their bill. Some of this depends on just the design of the rates itself and how much of the total revenue comes from the flow charge, and it can also vary from class to class. The above average customers, which typically includes about the top third of the customers, will probably pay more, and below average customers not as much as they would have. And all in all, customers benefit from being able to have some control over their utility bills by being their sewer bill by being more efficient.
I have another question. I clearly see the customer side of this. There is the wastewater agency side, which we'll be hearing from folks. But from your experience working with wastewater agencies, do you find that the base for those that are using fixed charges, is it that they have established their base rate at that fixed charge and then absorb the high and low individual customer input into their facility? They just deal. They sort of give a pass to the high volume customers, and they essentially benefit from the low volume customers. So their base rate is their fixed charge. Is that what you find or not?
Well, I find a lot of different practices. This has to deal with, it's an equity issue in large part. Wastewater agencies do have a high percent of fixed costs, 70+%. But there doesn't have to be a perfect alignment of the fixed costs with the fixed charge. Generally, this fixed charge, I would like to see it at no higher than 50% of the total revenue, and this is dependent, I think, on whether they bill on the tax rolls or not. When they bill on the tax rolls, they only get to adjust their charges once a year, and they don't receive a steady cash flow reimbursement from the county. They get reimbursed a couple of times a year. So for those agencies that bill on the tax rolls, having a fixed charge that's maybe closer to 50% might be an easier first step for them. Eventually coming down to 30%, I think, is better, because that places more of the emphasis on the flow component and allows for a greater differentiation between low flow and high flow customers. I'm currently working with 4 agencies in Marin County. One of them took one route, which was to set their fixed charge initially at 60%, and then in the second year to drop down to 40%. That was their strategy. Another neighboring city, though, wanted to go with 100% flow-based with no fixed charge at all. There is a minimum charge. They understand that their revenue will be a little bit more volatile, and they'll have to maintain higher reserves to buffer against that. So there are compensatory strategies, I guess you could say, to offset some of the risk in the fluctuation that flow introduces. But frankly, you know, when flow enters rates, these wastewater agencies, you know, they start to become water agencies to a certain extent. But in using winter flow, that's much less variable than using year-round flow the way water agencies do. So wastewater agencies shouldn't expect to see the instability in revenue that some water agencies have from year to year. Let's see, I think I have one more slide here. In terms of the use of data in today's technological world, this has become a very simple matter here. Most commercially available billing software systems can accommodate flow-based sewer rates without a problem at all. If an upgrade is required, typically the cost is not prohibitive, and the benefits that are provided far outweigh the cost. The ongoing administration costs very little. In the old days, this was a problem, dealing with data, but now these files can be emailed around from the water agency, and you can calculate the charges, and then if you're billing on the tax rolls, just email it off to the counties. I want to point out that the water suppliers are obligated to cooperate with the wastewater agencies to facilitate flow-based rates. As Ed mentioned, the California Urban Water Conservation Council signatory water agencies are supposed to be cooperative, and any water agency that's looking for financial assistance is required also under AB 1420.
So to wrap, excuse me, to wrap this up, to give you an idea of where we see this going, our goal is to help achieve an orderly transition from flat rate billing to volumetric billing. So one scenario for bringing this about that we think is plausible, we'd like to share with you. The framework would be a policy resolution, could be a policy resolution adopted by the board that embraces billing conversion by a specific date. This conversion could be effectuated by the board through 4 specific mechanisms. One would be to set criteria through the SRF process, setting eligibility criteria keyed to the establishment of a volumetric rate structure for SRF applicants. Second would be NPDES permits, new, renewed, or amended permits that would incorporate a provision calling for volumetric wastewater pricing by a specific date. That would be a policy that would be embraced by the board and implemented by the regional boards. The third would be the general waste discharge requirements for sanitary sewer collection systems as a statewide process, and this could also reference a requirement for volumetric pricing of collection systems. And we would also encourage attention to the obligation of water suppliers to provide timely and accurate billing information. I mean, in all fairness, for the wastewater service providers who are not part of a municipal or county water supply system, they're going to have to go out of house to get the data. And in all fairness to them, the water suppliers really do need to recognize an obligation to provide, to cooperate, to make this happen. Those that are signatories to the MOU have an obligation to do that. Others potentially don't. So we think that the board could speak to this in the policy resolution as well, and perhaps even develop a standard term to be included in new or amended water rights permits that would express the obligation of the suppliers in this regard. So at this point, our concept is to invite interested stakeholders that would include, of course, the sanitary sewer agencies and their trade associations, water suppliers, consumer and environmental groups, state agency staff also would have an interest in this, to join in discussions to explore policy options and see whether it's possible that a common set of recommendations could be developed, and to give this say 3 or 4 months. We'd like to report back or see a staff report back on the progress or results of these stakeholder discussions, and if a joint set of recommendations was possible, that hopefully could lay the foundation for board action in early 2013.
Guess
So
I'd call that an aggressive schedule, Ed.
Have you been reading the newspaper lately?
read it just this morning, actually.
Yeah, Ed, what I would suggest, and we're going to hear from certainly other speakers, but I think it would be irresponsible of the board not to consider the proposals you've brought forward, particularly given our obligations under the 2020 policy. I have a feeling that there may be complications that others will bring up. What I would suggest is that the stakeholders and yourselves get together. I don't know that we have the luxury of having staff assigned to facilitate something like this, but certainly I think when I was in grammar school they used the word monitor. I hate to use the word monitor because I'm not trying to talk down to you. I'm sure you're going to have one take on these meetings. Some other folks may have another take on the meetings, and I would like to have, in this case, our staff kind of be a neutral third-party sponge absorbing all of this, but I don't know that we have somebody that could regularly participate. I just think given the budget constraints we have, we're going to continue to run into staffing issues. That's not to say you guys just go work it out and tell us what you come up with. We'll do our best, and when I say things like this, my staff usually comes into my office and closes the door and said, what have you said? So we will try and work something like that out, but don't expect to have, a regular staff person compiling minutes of meetings and all of that, because we just don't have that luxury. So.
And just to be clear, the chairman is not suggesting a formation of a formal work group that would be subjected to Bagley-Keene.
No, I did that once before, Ed, and it I got prosthetic things all over my body after I did that. So I learned about unintended consequences of me opening my mouth on little working group things. So
I do have a question for you on behalf of
thank you for reminding me, though.
of one of our staff in the audience there, and that is, have you considered the energy savings associated with this effort along with the water savings?
Certainly there are energy savings there, but we haven't sought to quantify them.
And I would recommend that as you think about this, particularly in your in the implementation, it was largely focused on the water board, and you're before us, if that makes sense. But there is going to be a relook at SB 7X7, because at least early indications are that it may not reach the 20% reduction under current conditions. So something like this should be, I assume, would be a candidate for inclusion in whatever update is done on SB 7X7. I think the deadline was 2015, but you don't start on those things in 2015. You start now. So I assume that that's part of your plan, but that is important, because it essentially the DWR is doing a lot of the heavy lifting on SB 7X7.
Right. We'll be talking to DWR about this as well.
With that, Ms. Larson, would you like to come up and tell us all the reasons you love this idea?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Bobby Larson on behalf of the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. And I assume, since you said I get to say all the reasons why we have concerns, you're giving me more than the 7 minutes that I asked for.
No, you tell us you've talked fast,
I
so
do
we don't
talk
think
fast.
we need to.
Well, we do appreciate the opportunity to have some comments on the presentation that you just saw on volumetric pricing for wastewater. And we did also have the opportunity to speak with Ed and some of his colleagues at NRDC last week, and I think we had a very productive conversation. I want to emphasize that this is an issue of significant concern to the public wastewater community, and they're not all here because I told them they didn't have to come. I said, you do not have to come and take your 3 minutes to tell the board your concerns, because I will do that, and it's not an action item. So I don't want you to take all the empty seats as an indication that this isn't something that we care about.
You don't have a list of people that have given you their 3 minutes, do you?
If you need me to get it. So we do have significant concerns, particularly about the mandate aspect of some of the recommendations you saw there on the last slide. You've heard a perspective, and I want to compliment NRDC on the thoroughness of the work that they've done, and they've obviously given this a lot of thought, and frankly, they've touched on a lot of the issues that we have. But I just want to emphasize that we have a different perspective on many of the assumptions and conclusions that they have presented. So while we appreciate the effort that's gone into this, we think we're a long way from understanding this issue completely and knowing what direction we should go in California. We have 3 major areas of concern, I guess I would say, about the proposal. The first, and this has been acknowledged a little bit, particularly in the presentation on the logistics, but there are significant practical, legal, and even constitutional constraints on local agencies' ability to implement some of this volume-based pricing, and they have to be understood thoroughly and really addressed in any approach going forward. But perhaps even more importantly than that, because those are practical and legal things that if you work hard you can hopefully address them, we just are not persuaded that your sewer rate, your volumetric sewer rate, is going to be a meaningful driver for water conservation. And we really think that issue really needs more attention. One of the slides did show some, I believe they refer to as this is what we might see, or hypothetical benefits that might accrue from this. And there was the specific San Luis Obispo example, which is a good start. But I think that a question was asked by Board Member Doduk that is the question that we all have to ask, which is, to what extent are there other conservation measures or other conservation activities that are driving that reduction